A poet once said, "The whole universe is in a glass of wine." We will probably never know in what sense he meant that, for poets do not like to be understood. But it is true that if we look at a glass of wine closely enough, we see the entire universe. There are the things of physics, the twisting liquid which evaporates depending on the wind and weather, the reflections in the glass, and our imagination adds the atoms. The glass is a distillation of the Earth's rocks, and in its composition we see the secrets of the universe's age and the evolution of stars. What strange array of chemicals are in the wine? How did they come to be? There are the ferments, the enzymes, the substrates, and the products. There in wine is found the great generalization. All life is fermentation. Nobody can discover the chemistry of wine without discovering, as did Louis Pasteur, the cause of much disease. How vivid is the claret, pressing its existence into the consciousness that watches it. If our small minds, for some convenience, divide this glass of wine, this universe, into parts, physics, biology, geology, astronomy, psychology, and so on, remember that nature does not know it. So let us put it all back together, not forgetting ultimately what it is for. Let it give us one more final pleasure. Drink it and forget it all. Richard Feynman, 1963.
The most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion that stands at the cradle of true art and true science. Whoever does not know it and can no longer wonder, no longer marvel, is as good as dead and his eyes are dimmed. It was the experience of mystery, even if mixed with fear, that engendered religion. A knowledge of the existence of something we cannot penetrate, our perceptions of the profoundest reason and the most radiant beauty, which only in their most primitive forms are accessible to our minds. It is this knowledge and this emotion that constitute true religiosity. In this sense, and in this alone, I am a deeply religious man. I cannot conceive of a God who rewards and punishes his creatures, or has a will of the kind that we experience in ourselves. Neither can I, nor would I, want to conceive of an individual that survives his physical death. Let feeble souls, from fear or absurd egoism, cherish such thoughts. I am satisfied with the mystery of the eternity of life, and with the awareness and a glimpse of the marvelous structure of the existing world, together with the devoted striving to comprehend a portion, be it ever so tiny, of the reason that manifests itself in nature. Albert Einstein, 1931.
Your question is the most difficult in the world. It is not a question I can answer simply with yes or no. I am not an atheist. I do not know if I can define myself as a pantheist. The problem involved is too vast for our limited minds. May I not reply with a parable? The human mind, no matter how highly trained, cannot grasp the universe. We are in the position of a little child entering a huge library filled with books in many languages. The child knows someone must have written those books. It does not know how. It does not understand the languages in which they are written. The child dimly suspects a mysterious order in the arrangement of the books, but doesn't know what that is. That, it seems to me, is the attitude of the most intelligent human toward God. Albert Einstein, 1930. Imagine if all the tumult of the body were to quiet down, along with all our busy thoughts about earth, sea, and air. If the very world should stop, and the mind cease thinking about itself, go beyond itself, and be quite still. If all the fantasies that appear in dreams and imagination should cease, and there be no speech, no sign. Imagine if all things that are perishable grew still. For if we listen, they are saying, we did not make ourselves. He made us who abides forever. Imagine then that they should say this and fall silent, listening to the very voice of him who made them, and not to that of his creation, so that we should hear not his word through the tongues of men, nor the voice of angels, nor the clouds' thunder, nor any symbol, but his very self, which in these things we love, and go beyond ourselves to attain a flash of that eternal wisdom which abides above all things. And imagine if that moment were to go on and on, leaving behind all other sights and sounds but this one vision, which ravishes and absorbs and fixes the beholder in joy, so that the rest of eternal life were like that moment of illumination which leaves us breathless. Would this not be what is bidden in Scripture? Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. Augustine of Hippo, circa 400.
It is a great adventure to contemplate the universe beyond man, to contemplate what it would be like without man, as it was in a great part of its long history and as it is in a great majority of places. When this objective view is finally attained, and the mystery and majesty of matter are fully appreciated, to then turn the objective eye back on man, viewed as matter, to view life as part of this universal mystery of the greatest depth, is to sense an experience which is very rare and very exciting. It usually ends in laughter and a delight in the futility of trying to understand what this atom in the universe is, this thing, atoms with curiosity, that looks at itself and wonders why it wonders. Well, these scientific views end in awe and mystery, lost at the edge in uncertainty, but they appear to be so deep and so impressive that the theory that it is all arranged as a stage for God to watch man struggle for good and evil seems inadequate. Some will tell me that I have just described a religious experience. Very well, you may call it what you will. Then, in that language, I would say that the young man's religious experience is of such a kind that he finds the religion of his church inadequate to describe, to encompass that kind of experience. The God of the church isn't big enough. Richard Feynman, 1963.
Oh, my God. How does it happen in this poor old world, that thou art so great, and yet nobody finds thee? That thou callest so loudly, and nobody hears thee? That thou art so near, and nobody feels thee? that thou givest thyself to everybody, and nobody knows thy name. Men flee from thee and say they cannot find thee. They turn their backs and say they cannot see thee. They stop their ears and say they cannot hear thee. Hans Denk, circa 1520. God bade me behold the sea, and I saw the ships sinking and the planks floating. Then the planks too were submerged. And God said to me, those who voyage are not saved. And he said to me, those who, instead of voyaging, cast themselves into the sea, take a risk. And he said to me, those who voyage and take no risk shall perish. And he said to me, in taking the risk, there is a part of salvation. And the wave came and lifted those beneath it and overran the shore. And he said to me, the surface of the sea is a gleam that cannot be reached, and the bottom is a darkness impenetrable. And between the two are great fishes, which are to be feared. Nefari, circa 970. What? When we choose silence, we choose to give up the reasons not to love, which are the reasons for going to war, or continuing war, or separating, or being a victim, or being right. In a moment of silence, in a moment of no thought, no mind, we choose to give those up. This is what my teacher invited me to. Just choose silence. Don't even choose love. Choose silence, and love is apparent. If we choose love, we already have an idea of what love is. But if you choose silence, that is the end of ideas. You are willing to have no idea, to see what is present when there is no idea, past, present, future. No idea of love, no idea of truth, no idea of you, no idea of me. Love is apparent. Gangaji, 2009. Lustily, I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. When, from behind that craggy steep, till then the horizon's bound, a huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power instinct, upreared its head. I struck and struck again, and growing still in stature, the grim shape towered up between me and the stars. But after I had seen that spectacle, for many days my brain worked with a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being. Or my thoughts were hung with darkness. Call it solitude or blank desertion. William Wordsworth, 1888. Suppose a boat is crossing a river and another empty boat is about to collide with it. Even an irritable man would not lose his temper. But supposing there was someone in the second boat, then the occupant of the first would shout to him to keep clear, and if the other did not hear the first time, nor even when called 3 times, bad language would inevitably follow. In the first case, there was no anger. In the second, there was. Because in the first case, the boat was empty, and in the second, it was occupied. And so it is with man. If he could only roam empty through life, who would be able to injure him? Shuangzi, 4th century BC.
Well, that's no better a solution than any of the others, is it? So, in the end, have we learned anything from this look at why the world turned out the way it did that's of any use to us in our future? Something, I think. That the key to why things change is the key to everything. How easy is it for knowledge to spread? And that in the past, the people who made change happen were the people who had that knowledge, whether they were craftsmen or kings. Today, the people who make things change, the people who have that knowledge, are the scientists and the technologists who are the true driving force of humanity. And before you say, what about the Beethovens and the Michelangelos? Let me suggest something with which you may disagree violently. That at best, the products of human emotion, art, philosophy, politics, music, literature, are interpretations of the world that tell you more about the guy who's talking than about the world he's talking about. Second-hand views of the world, made third-hand by your interpretation of them. Things like that, as opposed to this. Know what it is? It's a bunch of amino acids, the stuff that goes to build up a worm, or a geranium, or you. This stuff's easier to take, isn't it? Understand this scientific knowledge is hard to take because it removes the reassuring crutches of opinion, ideology, and leaves only what is demonstrably true about the world. And the reason why so many people may be thinking about throwing away those crutches is because, thanks to science and technology, they have begun to know that they don't know so much, and that if they are to have more say in what happens to their lives, more freedom to develop their abilities to the full, they have to be helped towards that knowledge that they know exists and that they don't possess. And by help towards that knowledge, I don't mean give everybody a computer and say, help yourself. Where would you even start? No, I mean trying to find ways to translate the knowledge, to teach us to ask the right questions. See, we're on the edge of a revolution in communications technology that is going to make that more possible than ever before. Or, if that's not done, to cause an explosion of knowledge that will leave those of us who don't have access to it as powerless as if we were deaf, dumb, and blind. And I don't think most people want that. So what do we do about it? I don't know. But maybe a good start would be to recognize within yourself the ability to understand anything, because that ability is there, as long as it's explained clearly enough. And then go and ask for explanations. And if you're thinking right now, what do I ask for? Ask yourself if there's anything in your life that you want changed. That's where to start.
And so, by a backhanded, upside-down argument, was predicted that there is in carbon a level at 7.82 million volts, and then experiments in the laboratory with carbon show indeed that there is. And therefore the existence in the world of all these other elements is very closely related to the fact that there is this particular level in carbon. But the position of this particular level in carbon seems to us, after knowing the physical laws, to be a very complicated accident of 12 complicated particles interacting. So I wish to illustrate by this example that an understanding of the physical laws doesn't give you an understanding in a sense of understanding significance of the world in any way. The details of real experience are very far often from the fundamental laws. There are, in a way of speaking in the world, we have a way of discussing the world which you could call, we discuss it at various hierarchies or levels. Now, I don't mean to be very precise, there's another level and another level, but I will indicate by describing a set of ideas to you, just one after the other, what I mean by hierarchies of ideas. For example, at one end, we have the fundamental laws of physics. Then we invent other terms for concepts which are approximate, who have, we believe, the ultimate explanation in terms of the fundamental laws. For instance, heat. Heat is supposed to be the jiggling, and it's just a word for a hot thing, is just a word for a mass of atoms which are jiggling. For that, fundamentally, we should think of the atoms jiggling. But for a while, if we're talking about heat, we sometimes forget about the atoms jiggling. Just like when we talk about the glacier, we don't always think of the hexagonal ice snowflakes which originally fell. Another example of the same thing is a salt crystal. Looked at fundamentally, it's a lot of protons, neutrons, and electrons. But we have this concept, salt crystal, which carries a whole pattern already of fundamental interactions, or idea like pressure. Now, if we go higher up from this, in another level, we have properties of substances like refractive index, how light is bent when it goes through something, or surface tension, the fact that the water tends to pull itself together, is described by a number. I remind you that we have to go through several laws down to find out that it's the pull of the atoms and so on, but we still say surface tension, and don't worry when we're discussing surface tension of the inner workings, always. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Go on, up in the hierarchy. With the water, we have the waves, and we have a thing like a storm. We have a word for storm, which represents an enormous mass of phenomena. Or sunspot, or star, which is an accumulation of things. And it's not worthwhile always to think of it way back. In fact, we can't, because the higher up we go, we have too many steps in between, each one of which is a little weak, and we haven't thought them all through yet. If we go up in this hierarchy of complexity, we get to things like frog, or nerve impulse, which you see is an enormously complicated thing in the physical world, involving an organization of matter in a very elaborate complexity. And then we go on, we come to things, words, and concepts like man, and history, or political expediency, and so forth, which is a series of concepts that we use to understand things at an ever higher level. And going on, we come to things like evil and beauty and hope. Now, which end is nearer to the ultimate creator, or the ultimate? So if I make a religious metaphor, which end is nearer to God? Beauty and hope, or the fundamental laws? I think that the right way, of course, is to say that the whole structural interconnections of the thing is the thing that we have to look at, and that the sequence of hierarchy, that all the sciences and all the efforts, not just the sciences, but all the efforts of intellectual kind, are to see the connections of the hierarchies, is to connect beauty to history, is to connect history to man's psychology, the man's psychology to the working of the brain to the neural impulse to the chemistry, and so forth, up and down, both ways. And today we cannot, and there's no use making believe we can, draw carefully a line all the way from one end of this thing to the other. In fact, we've just begun to see that there is this relative hierarchy. And so I don't think either end is nearer to God's. And to stand at either end And to walk out off the end of the pier only, hoping out in that direction is the complete understanding, is a mistake. And to stand with evil and beauty and hope, or to stand with the fundamental laws, hoping that way to get a deep understanding of the whole world, with that aspect alone, is a mistake. And it is not sensible either for the ones who specialize at one end and the ones who specialize at the other end to have such disregard for each other. They don't actually, but the people say they do. So. But that actually the great mass of workers in between, connecting one step to another, are improving all the time our understanding of the world, both from working at the ends and working in the middle. And in that way, we are gradually understanding this connection, this tremendous world of interconnecting hierarchies.
Know yourself as the open, empty, luminous presence of awareness. Open because you say yes unconditionally and indiscriminately to all appearances of the mind, body, and world. Like empty space, you have no mechanism inherent within you that can resist any appearance. We don't have to make this the case, it is already the case. Empty, because although you, I, this aware presence, is aware of thoughts, sensations, and perceptions, it is not made out of a thought, a sensation, or a perception. It is made out of pure knowing or awareness. And luminous, because just like the sun, relatively speaking, that renders all objects seeable, so you, I, this open, empty presence, renders all experience knowable. In fact, we don't really see objects, relatively speaking, illumined by the sun. We just see reflections or modulations of the sun's light, appearing as a multiplicity and diversity of color. In the same way, we don't really know the objects of the mind, body, and the world. We just know our knowing of them. All we know, all that is known, is the knowing of experience. And you are that knowing. All that is ever known is a modulation of our own knowing presence, modulating itself in the form of thinking, sensing, and perceiving, and seeming to become a mind, a body, and a world. But we never actually know a mind, a body, and a world as they are normally conceived. We just know our knowing of them. And this knowing, the substance of our experience, the only substance of our experience, is ourself. In other words, we know ourself alone. Awareness knows nothing other than itself. Be knowingly this open, empty, luminous presence of awareness. We don't need to do anything special to make this happen. Above all, we don't have to manipulate the mind in any way whatsoever to be this presence of awareness. This presence of awareness, which is simply our self, what we refer to when we say I, is ever present. Just check this in your own experience. Nothing that I am saying this evening, there is nothing that cannot be checked in your own direct experience right now. I bring no special knowledge to this meeting. I don't have a store of knowledge which I am disseminating. I'm just, within the limits of language, trying to describe the current experience. Ask yourself, do I know anything other than now? Try to experience the not now. Try first to experience the past. It's easy to experience a thought about the past. But what about the actual past to which this thought refers? Try to experience that. Can you step into the past? Can you go 1 second into the past? Or 1 second into the future? Thought can go there. But what about you? Really try to go there to make sure that this is not just an interesting philosophical conversation, but that it is actually your experience. That the past and the future are never experienced. And if the past and the future are never actually experienced, they are only thought about. And that thought about the past and the future is always now. If this past and future are never experienced, what does that say about time? Time is a movement between a non-existent past towards a non-existent future. It's a theory, a necessary and valid theory, but a theory that doesn't refer to the reality of our experience. Nobody has ever or could ever experience time. When I say nobody, I mean yourself, awareness, the only one that knows or is aware. When I arrived off the plane from London in Washington, D.C. last weekend before coming here, the friend who picked me up asked me how the flight was, and she said, "How long did it take?" And I experienced thought being cranked up like an old motor, a little resistant to get going. And for a moment, I could feel the cogs of thought almost moving, trying to work out how much time the flight had taken. Because in my experience, it had been now all the way. I had never left London. London had left me. I had never got onto an aeroplane, a flow of sensations and perceptions that thought abstracts and calls a body in an aeroplane, flowed through me. And I never arrived in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. arrived in me, or at least the cluster of perceptions that thought calls Washington, D.C. arrived in me. In the same way, nobody ever walked into this room, and nobody is sitting on a chair, and nobody is listening to a talk. A colourful flow of sensations and perceptions appears in awareness. But awareness never goes anywhere or does anything. It is always here and now, not here a place and now a time. Here, this dimensionless, now this timeless presence of our own being. That is our experience, whether we recognize it or not. Now the mind may feel a little rebellious when it hears this. It may say, yes, 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 that's true, but there is an undeniable continuity to my experience. And this undeniable continuity would seem to be evidence of time. Where does this felt sense of continuity come from? All we know of the mind is the current thought or image. And thoughts and images are intermittent. The body is known through sensation, and all sensations are intermittent. All we know of the world is perception, that is, sights, sounds, tastes, textures, and smells. In fact, nobody has ever experienced a world as such, a world as it is normally conceived to be. We just know the current perception, and all perception is intermittent. So if the so-called mind, body, and world are intermittent, from where does this felt sense of continuity come from? It comes from the only thing, if we can call it a thing, that is truly continuous, or in fact not continuous, but ever present now in our experience, and that is our own being, the presence of awareness. The presence of awareness is the only thing that is known to be ever present. Now the mind knows nothing of awareness because the mind only knows apparent objects. So when the mind looks at experience to find what it is that accounts for continuity, it cannot see awareness. And so it manufactures a substance called time to account for the continuity of experience. In other words, continuity in time is what eternity looks like when viewed through the narrow slit of the mind. Permanence in space is what the infinite, unlimited nature of awareness looks like when viewed through the narrow slit of the mind. Continuity and permanence are pale reflections at the level of the mind of the true, eternal and infinite nature of awareness, that is, of our self. What else can we say about ourself from our actual experience? Which means right now, what can we know for certain about ourself? Not what thought may tell us about ourself, but what we actually know in this moment, derived only from our experience of ourself. Ask yourself, can I, this open, empty, knowing presence, can I be agitated? Thought can be agitated. Sensations, or the body, can be agitated. The world can be agitated. But what about you, the one that knows the apparent mind, body, and world? Can you, this open, empty presence, be agitated? See, in your experience right now, that you are, and this of course is just an image, are like an open, empty space, such as the space of this room. Nothing that appears within this room can agitate it. We are all sitting peacefully now, but if we were to stand up and start dancing or fighting, would the space of this room become agitated? You are like that. You, I, the presence of awareness, are undisturbable, imperturbable. We don't need to become imperturbable, and this undisturbability of ourself is not dependent upon the condition of the mind. Right now, you, awareness, are utterly imperturbable, and for this reason, another name for ourself is peace. Peace is not a quality that our self has, it is what our self is. Not peace of mind. Minds are more or less agitated. This peace that passeth understanding, that is not of the mind. It doesn't have to be sought, it is not hiding in the background of experience. This very awareness that is seeing, hearing, knowing, is pure peace itself, shining in all experience, however apparently agitated that experience may be. Ask yourself, can I, this presence of awareness, ever lack something? Thoughts can say that something is missing. Feelings can say that something is missing. But what about you? Without referring to thought or feeling, is there the slightest motive in you to avoid the now and replace it with the not now? See that in yourself, this presence of awareness, there is not the slightest impulse or possibility to avoid the now. And what do we call this absolute absence of resistance to the now? The absolute absence of resisting what is and seeking what is not. What is the common name we give to this? It is called happiness. We all know that when we are happy, we are by definition not resisting the now and seeking in the past or the future. By happiness, of course, I do not mean a pleasant state of the mind or the body. I mean this absolute impossibility of ourself ever to resist or seek. To resist what is and to seek what is not. So happiness, like peace, is just another name for ourself. It is not a quality that ourself has, it is what ourself is. What else can we say for certain based on this current experience about ourselves? When I was driving here, or being driven here, the day before yesterday, from the airport in San Francisco, I was looking in the wing mirror of the passenger seat, and I noticed the words inscribed at the bottom of the wing mirror. And they said, "Objects in the mirror are closer than you think." A statement of pure non-duality. Objects that appear in the mirror of consciousness are closer than we think. How close to a mirror are the objects that appear in it? Are there in fact two things? One, the objects that appear in the mirror, and two, the mirror? Or is it all just mirror? All we know of the apparent mind is the experience of thinking. And thinking is just a modulation of yourself, a modulation of knowing, or awareness. All we know of the apparent body is the experience of sensing. And sensing is a modulation of your self-awareness. All we know of the apparent world is the experience of seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. These are all modulations of knowing, modulations of ourself. In other words, we never truly know a mind or a body or a world. These labels are just abstractions that thought superimposes on the intimacy of our experience. From the point of view of experience, which is the only real point of view, experience is much closer, much more intimate. So close as to not admit the possibility of two things. One, myself, awareness, and two, the object that I know. Even that is an abstraction. It may be a useful stepping stone, a halfway understanding to conceive of thoughts, sensations, and perceptions arising in awareness. But nothing arises in awareness. The only substance of all experience, the only substance of thinking, sensing, and perceiving is already awareness. What do we call this absolute absence of two things? A subject that knows and an object that is known. Take now the experience of hearing. Go to the sound of the air conditioning. Forget about the labels sound and air conditioning. Our only knowledge of the apparent air conditioning is the experience of hearing. How close does hearing take place to you? 5 meters away? 10 meters away? Refer only to your experience, not to what thought tells you about sound. Where is hearing? Is it close? Intimate? And in the experience of hearing, can you find two parts? One part that hears, and another part that is heard? Or is it just one seamless, intimate substance called myself? And what about this room? Thought says, I, the inside self in here, sees the room, the outside world, out there. But what does experience say? All we know of the apparent room is the experience of seeing. Remove seeing, and the room vanishes. In other words, we don't know a room. We just know the experience of seeing. Does seeing take place 5, 10, 15 meters away from yourself? Or is seeing utterly intimate? And can you find two parts to the experience of seeing? One part that sees, and another part that is seen? Or is it just one seamless, intimate substance? And what is the name, the common name we give to the absolute intimacy of all experience? It is called love. Love is the most familiar, experience that we all know, the collapse or dissolution of the sense of a self in here and an object, other, or world out there. The collapse of this sense of separateness, distance, otherness, not me-ness, is what we call love. Love is just another name for non-duality. If we call it non-duality, there's just a few thousand of us in the world that are interested in it. But if we call it love, or peace, or happiness, then all 7 billion of us are interested in it. So why is it, if love, peace, happiness are the natural condition of all experience, the substance out of which all experience is made, how is it that it seems not to be experienced? It is because of a single thought that rises in awareness, made only of awareness, which imagines that awareness shares the limits of the thoughts, feelings, and sensations that appear within it. It is like imagining that a mirror shares the limits of the objects that appear in it. With that thought alone, the ever-present, unlimited awareness, which is what we are, seems to acquire or take on the apparent limits of the body and the mind. Just as the screen seems to take on the limits of an image when a film begins. As a result of this imaginary collapse or contraction of our self, unlimited, eternal awareness into a body and a mind, these qualities of love, peace, and happiness are seemingly veiled. And it is for this reason that the self, the separate self that thought imagines us to be, is always, by definition, on a search in the imaginary outside world for the apparently lost love, peace, and happiness. However, this imaginary inside self cannot, by definition, find the love that it seeks, because its very presence, its apparent presence, is the veiling of that love. All the separate self seeks is love. In fact, the separate self is not an entity that searches, it is the activity of resisting the now and seeking the not now. All this seeking ever wants is love. But love is the dissolution of this seeking, the dissolution of this imaginary self. In other words, the separate self that seeks love is like a moth that seeks a flame. The flame is all the moth wants, but it is the only thing it cannot have. Because as the moth touches the flame, it dies. That is its way of knowing the flame. It becomes the flame as it touches it. That is the separate self's way of finding love by dying in it. The death or dissolution of the separate self is the experience of love. So simply be knowingly this open, empty, luminous presence of awareness, whose nature, whose inherent nature is love, peace, and happiness. Not a love, peace, and happiness that is in the background of experience that has to be sought, but that is shining in full view at the heart of all experience. In fact, experience is made out of this substance called peace or happiness.
Up there, you go around every hour and a half, time after time after time. You wake up usually in the mornings, and just the way that the track of your orbits go, you wake up over the Mideast, over North Africa. As you eat breakfast, you look out the window as you're going past, and there's the Mediterranean area, and Greece, and Rome, and North Africa, and the Sinai, the whole area. And you realize that in one glance, that what you're seeing is what was the whole history of man for years, the cradle of civilization. And you go around down across North Africa and out over the Indian Ocean, and look up at that great subcontinent of India, pointed down toward you as you go past it. And Ceylon off to the side, Burma, Southeast Asia, out over the Philippines, and up across that monstrous Pacific Ocean. Vast body of water. You've never realized how big that is before. And you finally come up across the coast of California and look for those friendly things. Los Angeles and Phoenix and on across El Paso. And there's Houston. There's home. And you look, and sure enough, there's the Astrodome. And you identify with that, you know? It's an attachment. And down across New Orleans, and then looking down to the south, and there's the whole peninsula of Florida laid out. And all the hundreds of hours you spent flying across that route, down in the atmosphere, all that is friendly again. And you go out across the Atlantic Ocean and back across Africa. And you do it again, and again, and again. And that identity, that you identify with Houston, and then you identify with Los Angeles, and Phoenix, and New Orleans, and everything. And the next thing you recognize in yourself is you're identifying with North Africa. You look forward to that. You anticipate it. And there it is. That whole process begins to shift of what it is you identify with. When you go around it in an hour and a half, you begin to recognize that your identity is with that whole thing. And that makes a change. You look down there, and you can't imagine how many borders and boundaries you crossed again and again and again. And you don't even see them. At that wake-up scene, the Mid-East, you know there are hundreds of people killing each other over some imaginary line that you can't see. From where you see it, the thing is a whole, and it's so beautiful. And you wish you could take one from each side in hand and say, look at it from this perspective. Look at that. What's important? And so a little later on, your friend, again those same neighbors, another astronaut, the person next to you goes out to the moon. And now he looks back and sees the Earth not as something big where he can see the beautiful details, but he sees the Earth as a small thing out there. And now that contrast between that bright blue and white Christmas tree ornament and that black sky, that infinite universe, really comes through. The size of it, the significance of it, it becomes both things. It becomes so small and so fragile, and such a precious little spot in that universe that you can block it out with your thumb. And you realize that on that small spot, that little blue and white thing is everything that means anything to you. All of history and music and poetry and art and war and death and birth and love, tears, joy, games, all of it is on that little spot out there that you can cover with your thumb. And you realize that that perspective, that you've changed, that there's something new there. That relationship is no longer what it was. And then you look back on the time when you were outside on that EVA and those few moments that you had the time because the camera malfunctioned, that you had the time to think about what was happening. And you recall staring out there at the spectacle that went before your eyes. Because now, you're no longer inside something with a window looking out at a picture. But now you're out there. And what you've got around your head is a goldfish bowl, and there are no limits here. There are no frames. There are no boundaries. You're really out there, over it, floating, going 25,000 miles per hour, ripping through space, a vacuum, and there's not a sound. There's a silence, the depth of which you've never experienced before. And that silence contrasts so markedly with the scenery and the speed with which you know you're going. That contrast, the mix of those two things, really comes through. And you think about what you're experiencing and why. Do you deserve this? This fantastic experience? Have you earned this in some way? Are you separated out to be touched by God to have some special experience here that other men cannot have? You know the answer to that is no. There's nothing that you've done that deserves that earned that. It's not a special thing for you. You know very well at that moment, and it comes through to you so powerfully that you're the sensing element for man. You look down and see the surface of that globe that you've lived on all this time, and you know all those people down there. They are like you. They are you. And somehow you represent them when you are up there. A sensing element. That point out on the end. And that's a humbling feeling. It's a feeling that says you have a responsibility. It's not for yourself. The eye that doesn't see does not do justice to the body. That's why it's there. That's why you're out there. And somehow you recognize that you're a piece of this total life. You're out on that forefront and you have to bring that back somehow. And that becomes a rather special responsibility. It tells you something about your relationship with this thing we call life. And when you come back, there's a difference in that world now. There's a difference in that relationship between you and that planet, and you and all those other forms of life on that planet, because you've had that kind of experience. It's a difference, and it's so precious. And all through this, I've used the word you because it's not me. It's not Dave Scott. It's not Dick Gordon, Pete Conrad, John Glenn. It's you. It's us. It's we. It's life. It's had that experience. And it's not just my problem to integrate. It's not my challenge to integrate, my joy to integrate. It's yours. It's everybody's. Russell Schweikart, 1975.
Therefore, I thank you, my God, because you make clear to me that there is no other way of approaching you, except that which to all humans, even to the most learned philosophers, seems wholly inaccessible and impossible. For you have shown me that you cannot be seen elsewhere than where impossibility confronts and obstructs me. O Lord, you, who are the food of the mature, have given me courage to do violence to myself, for impossibility coincides with necessity, and I have discovered that the place where you are found unveiled is girded about with the coincidence of contradictories. This is the wall of paradise, and it is there in paradise that you reside. The wall's gate is guarded by the highest spirit of reason, and unless it is overpowered, the way in will not lie open. Thus, it is on the other side of the coincidence of contradictories that you will be able to be seen, and nowhere on this side. If, therefore, impossibility is necessity in your sight, O Lord, there is nothing which your sight does not see. Nicholas of Cusa, 1453. The relation between the controller and the controlled is reciprocal. The scientist in the laboratory studying the behavior of a pigeon designs contingencies and observes their effects. His apparatus exerts a conspicuous control on the pigeon, but we must not overlook the control exerted by the pigeon. The behavior of the pigeon has determined the design of the apparatus and the procedures in which it is used. Some such reciprocal control is characteristic of all science. As Francis Bacon put it, nature, to be commanded, must be obeyed. The scientist who designs a cyclotron is under the control of the particles he is studying. The behavior with which a parent controls his child, either aversively or through positive reinforcement, is shaped and maintained by the child's responses. A psychotherapist changes the behavior of his patient in ways which have been shaped and maintained by his success in changing that behavior. A government or religion prescribes and imposes sanctions selected by their effectiveness in controlling citizen or communicant. An employer induces his employees to work industriously and carefully with wage systems determined by their effects on behavior. The classroom practices of the teacher are shaped and maintained by the effects on his students. In a very real sense, then, the slave controls the slave driver, the child, the parent, the patient, the therapist, the citizen, the government, the communicant, the priest, the employee, the employer, and the student, the teacher. B.F. Skinner, 1971.
Two major schools of Zen exist in Japan, the Rinzai and the Soto. Both have the same goal of seeing the world unmediated, but their approaches are different. In the Soto school, the emphasis is on quiet contemplation in a seated position without a particular focus for thought. The method in the Rinzai school, however, is to put the intellect to work on problems that have no logical resolution. Such problems are known as koans, from the Chinese kongan, meaning public announcement. Some are mere questions. For example, when your mind is not dwelling on the dualism of good and evil, what is your original face before you were born? Others are set in a question and answer form, like, what is the Buddha? Answer, 3 pounds of flax, or the cypress tree in the courtyard, to name but two of the classic responses. According to tradition, there are 1,700 such conundrums in the Zen repertoire, and their common aim is to induce a kind of intellectual catastrophe, a sudden jump which lifts the individual out of the domain of words and reason into a direct, non-mediated experience known as satori. Zen differs from other meditative forms, including other schools of Buddhism, in that it does not start from where we are and gradually lead us to a clear view of the true way of the world. It is not a progressive system in this respect. The sole purpose of studying Zen is to have Zen experiences, sudden moments, like flashes of lightning, when the intellect is short-circuited and there is no longer a barrier between the experiencer and reality. David Darling, 1996.
You see, a motif is this. He put his hands together, drew them apart, the 10 fingers open, then slowly, very slowly, brought them together again, clasped them, squeezed them tightly, meshing them. That's what one should try to achieve. If one hand is held too high or too low, it won't work. Not a single link should be too slack, leaving a hole through which the emotion, the light, the truth can escape. You must understand that I work on the whole canvas, on everything at once. With one impulse, with undivided faith, I approach all the scattered bits and pieces. Everything we see falls apart, vanishes, doesn't it? Nature is always the same, but nothing in her that appears to us lasts. Our art must render the thrill of her permanence along with her elements, the appearance of all her changes. It must give us a taste of her eternity. What is there underneath? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Everything, you understand? So I bring together her wandering hands. I take something at right, something at left, here, there, everywhere. Her tones, her colors, her nuances. I set them down, I bring them together. They form lines, they become objects, rocks, trees, without my planning. They take on volume, value. If these volumes, these values, correspond on my canvas, in my sensibility, to the planes, to the spots which are there before our eyes, then my canvas has brought its hands together. It does not waver. The hands have been joined neither too high nor too low. My canvas is true, compact, full. But if there is the slightest distraction, if I fail just a little bit, above all, if I interpret too much one day, if today I am carried away by a theory which runs counter to that of yesterday, if I think while I paint, if I meddle, whoosh, everything goes to pieces. Paul Cézanne, as related by Joachim Gasquet, 1921.
Looked at on the astronomical timescale, humanity is at the very beginning of its existence. A newborn babe, with all the unexplored potentialities of babyhood. And until the last few moments, its interest has been centered absolutely and exclusively on its cradle and feeding bottle. It has just become conscious of the vast world existing outside itself and its cradle. It is learning to focus its eyes on distant objects, and its awakening brain is beginning to wonder, in a vague, dreamy way, what they are and what purpose they serve. Its interest in this external world is not much developed yet, so that the main part of its faculties is still engrossed with the cradle and feeding bottle, but a little corner of its brain is beginning to wonder. James Jeans, 1928. In any case, our 3 days old infant cannot be very confident of any interpretation it puts on a universe which it only discovered a minute or two ago. We have said it has 70 years of life before it, but in truth, its expectation of life would seem to be nearer to 70,000 years. It may be puzzled, distressed, and often irritated at the apparent meaninglessness and incomprehensibility of the world to which it has suddenly wakened up. But it is still very young. Might travel half the world over before finding another baby as young and inexperienced as itself. It has before it time enough and to spare in which it may understand everything. Sooner or later, the pieces of the puzzle must begin to fit together. Although, it may reasonably be doubted whether the whole picture can ever be comprehensible to one small and apparently quite insignificant part of the picture. James Jeans, 1928.
At dawn.
Star at dawn.
At dawn.
A bubble
A bubble in a stream.
in a stream.
Phantom.
A phantom.
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 and a dream.
And a dream.
And a dream.